This is a revision lesson. We are going to have a look at the work, the content that has been covered in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter. So I've got good news for you. These are the two quarters where you can score a lot of marks. The topics, are so that it studies easy, and really you can really go for lots of marks if you are well prepared. And that is actually our goal today, to get you as well as possible prepared for the examination. Now, firstly, we are going to have a look at development geography. And development geography, that is the topic that has been covered currently in the third quarter. Now, as an introduction to what we've got going to do today, let's have a look at the purpose of this revision. Firstly, remember that we are busy with revision, not teaching. It is totally impossible that we could cover the content of both term 3 and term 4 in this session. So it's going to be revision and not teaching. Secondly, as I've mentioned, we're going to have a look at term 3 and term 4 topics in the syllabus. We are going to lay emphasis also on how to study these topics and not leave you only with the content thereof. So please pay attention when I come to showing you how to study certain parts of the syllabus. We are going to unpack and discuss questions. Now, this is our third recording with regard to the revision, and in every one of the previous two, we had a look at a certain type of question, a certain type of data that we tried to unpack with you. So that is also one of the things that we will be discussing today. And then, very important, the integration with Mapwork. Remember, grade 11s, that a whole new era is dawning on geography this year, where the matrics will be writing the first of the new structure of the geography exams, and you will be following this year, as well as next year. You will be the second group to do this. But what's important with the new structure, grade 11s, is the integration with the Mapwork. So when I'm busy with Mapwork, we will also show you how to integrate that with your topics. And then what's very important is that you must know that these lessons are available on the portal of the Western Cape Education Department. We usually send the links to you by means of a poster, which will also reach you as soon as possible for grade 3 term 3 and term 4. You have received term 1 and term 2 already. All you need to do, look at the subject, tap on the subject that you need, and the revision lesson, the contents of the revision lesson that I am going to present today will appear on your phone. So please do that. It will be of extreme help of you, and really prepare, see that you are prepared decently to get the point marks that you really deserve. Now, you know that every one of my revision lessons, I kick off with this, the questions that geographers ask. Now, there's a reason why we do this. And the reason, therefore, is that these are the questions that usually pop up in your exams. And many of you are not aware of these questions. Now, if you know the questions that geographers ask, it will be easy for you to anticipate the questions that will be in the exams. Remember, I didn't say that you are spotting the question. There's a big difference between the two. If you know how a geographer thinks, you are a young geographer, if you know how a geographer thinks, you will know that these are the questions that I can expect in the exams. Now, let's have a look at these questions that geographers ask. The first question is, what is it? The second question is, where is it? Third one, why is it there? Then, what does it look like? What happened, or how did it happen? What is the impact, whether on the environment, whether on the economy, whatever? And how can it be managed? Now, if you look at these questions, grade 11, it will be a good idea that you really start, using these questions in your preparations for the exams, because it's going to be much easier. You're going to next year when you are grade 12. Do it this year already. Because this means that you are studying and you are preparing yourself towards the examination. This is very, very important that you must do this as well. Now, many of your questions, in fact, the large majority of the questions that are set in the geography question paper that you will have to answer are the data response questions. Now, you should know these questions by now. These questions, since your early high school, even primary school, you have been confronted with these questions. These are questions that usually start with, study the diagram and, or the questions refer to figure 3.5 or whatever. When they refer you to data. Now, data is not only numbers when it comes to data response to questions. And that is why it's very important that you must know what type of data you can expect in the question paper on which the questions will be based. And what's the most important thing of that is that you must be in a position, and this is very important what I'm going to tell you now, you must be in a position to respond to the different types of data. You don't respond to a map in exactly the same way that you respond to a graph. Okay, so that is what I'm trying to tell you. So let us have a look at the types of data that are used in the question papers. The first one will be is maps. That's the main tool of a geographer, isn't it? And then diagrams, case studies, statistics and graphs, infographics, and cartoons. Now, it's very important that you must be able to apply all your content on these different types of data. Now, as I've mentioned to you, remember that if you deal with maps, you don't deal with maps in the same way that you deal with a case study, for instance. And if you ever look at our revision recordings that we've done throughout the year, and next year for your matric as well, we will deal with all these things, all right? And we have dealt with this also in previous broadcasts and previous recordings as well. Go back and have a look at those things and prepare yourself thoroughly that you can be in a position to actually respond to any type of data that they give to you. Now, let's have a look at our content. And for this quarter, as I said, we are going to have a look at the development geography, and this is very, very important that we look at this. You know that when it comes to development geography, the most important thing is your concepts. Okay, it's very important. You'll see how many concepts you will find here, and when you get your study guide that we send out to the schools, you'll see that I think there are something like 25 of these concepts that you must know. Because you see, when it comes to development and a concept is used in a question and you don't know the concept, you're not only going to lose 2 marks because you can't define it. You can lose up to 10, 15 marks simply because you didn't know the concept. So your concepts are very, very important when it comes to development geography. And in the booklet that we sent out to you, you will see on the last page, you will find, as I've said, a lot of concepts. All you need to do is to look up the concepts and write the definition in next to it. We've given you ample space for you to write in that, right? And we've left out the definition because we want you to go and have a look at it. The definitions are in your textbooks. The definitions are in the little booklet that we will be seeing to you. So make sure that you know these things. Okay, the first thing that we're going to have a look at is what is development. Now, before I carry on, grade 11s, remember the questions that geographers ask. Here's the first one already. And throughout this our session today, I'm going to remind you of this question, and I'm going to refer you to those questions, just to show you how important these questions are. And as I've mentioned to you so many times, grade 11s, remember that the only thing that the examiner is going to do is to use other words, to use other sentences, to actually ask the same question. So let's have a look at this. What is development? Now, development is the improvement in people's quality of life and standard of living. And when you have a look at quality life, it refers to things like education, healthcare, services, the social, and the politics, of course. When you have a look at the standard of living, this has to do with the material well-being of a person, the value of their savings, the possessions they have. Are you in possession of a TV, of a phone, of a motor car, or whatever? This has to do with your standard of living. But remember that we are busy with something called development geography. So let's have a look at this. This refers to the characteristics that describe the stage a country has reached on economic, cultural, social, and technology levels. Now, what's important, that paragraph, that first paragraph is so very important. Because if you look at that paragraph, you will immediately notice that the level, remember this as the level that the country has reached in two countries won't be the same. In a group of countries won't be the same. So we must have a look at the economic, cultural, social, and technological levels. Now, when you look at development when it comes to countries, we've got a very important thing to share with you. And that is that a huge development gap exists. Now, we look at this image that we've got here. On the one side of the road, you see, people that relatively have a lot of, money or whatever. And on this side, we will see that this is a poorer nation. So what's important is that you must know that in the world, we've got the developing countries and the developed countries. Now, let's have a look of them. The developing will be an economic poor country. It will be less developed economically, and they are called the LEDC, the less economically developed countries. Now, examples, Brazil, Nigeria, and this is very important that I'm going to refer to here. This pie chart that we've got here. And you've got to compare this with the other one later on. Have a look at the green here, the primary activities. Like, for instance, farming. Look at the large percentage that farming has in this pie chart. And then you look at your tertiary, which means your services. And look at the small amount of services in your developing countries. Now, let's have a look at the developed countries, and immediately you're going to see it's exactly the opposite. Here we've got economic wealthy country, and they are called the MEDCs, or the more economic developing countries. USA, Germany, they are examples of these type of countries. Now, remember I've told you we must have a look at the difference in the pie chart between the two. Have a look at the tertiary here, the red, and immediately you see the difference between the two. Small tertiary, in other words, a small number of and variety of services, and look at this here. And look at the primary here, like, as I've said, like your agriculture, your farming here. So this is more a farming-based economy that we've got here, and the tertiary here, in this the developed world, the emphasis is much more than in the developing world. Now, when you have a look at this grade 11s, remember that the one is just the opposite of the other one. If you know the one, you know the characteristics of the. So you only need to know the one and just say, okay, the opposite, and I get to the other one. Remember the graphs, okay? It's very important. If you like graphs, your graphs, your statistical, how good are you at that? You've got to practice these things, because they are going to be, especially here in the developing part of your syllabus, you can be confronted with graphs. And when you're in matric, you can get up to 2 questions where you're going to get either statistics or graphs. So please, people, see that you really know how to work with graphs. We haven't got time to do that here, but go back to your teacher. And if you don't know how all the different types of graph works, please see that you are in a position to do so. Okay, now the next thing is the indicators of development. Now, if you ever look at the indicators of development, here are 6 concepts And I told you in our introduction that development geography, if you don't know your concepts, you are really looking for trouble. So please see that you know these concepts. They are very popular to be examined either in a definition or as part of questions. Now, let me just get back to definitions again. In the old system on which geography was examined, definitions only counted 1 mark. Now it's going to be 2 marks, double the amount. Now you're going to say, okay, it's only 1 mark more. Don't see it as only 1 mark more. See that it's actually counting twice more than in the previous one. This means that if you know your concepts, then you can score up to 2 marks for every concept that you know. If you don't know your concept, then you're going to lose those 2 marks. And remember, there are going to be at least 5 that they're going to ask between 4 or 5 for you to define. And the old system, you would only lose 5 marks. See, now it becomes a little more, the marks that you can lose. If there are 5 definitions, you can lose 10 marks now. So please, people, see that you know your definitions. Okay, let's have a look at the indicators for the development. The first indicator that we've got is the GDP, or the gross domestic product. That is the total value of goods and services produced in 1 year in a country in 1 year. And please, grade 11s, when you give your definitions, don't look at the textbook definition. All right? Give it in your own words. Study it in your own words. It's going to be much easier to define things than to really, in your brain to save a textbook definition. Okay, the second one is a gross national product. Now, please do not get mixed up with these two, right? So let's have a look. The gross national product includes all income, including from foreign countries in 1 year. What's the difference? This one is produced in a country, only in the borders of one country. And this one also includes the foreign countries in 1 year. Okay, the next one, the HDI, or the Human Development Index, that focuses on the quality of life. It has to do with the standard of living, it has to do with the life expectancy and education. That is your Human Development Index. Your Gini coefficient is a measurement that plots the level of inequality, usually income, of a country. Now here you will see that in many countries you get a huge gap between the rich that we've got and the poor that we've got. And that level of inequality that I've just showed you now, usually of income, that is called your Gini coefficient. Now the following one is your infant mortality. That's the number of infants under the age of 12 that die per 1,000 births. Now this is very important that you must know this, because when you have a look at your developed country and your developing country, you will have a huge difference between this, as I'll show you when we come to the next slide. Obviously, where you've got good medical services, there you will have less deaths per 1,000 infants. Obviously, that will be in the developed country, but more about that in our next slide. Then the next one has to do with life expectancy. That's the average number of years that you are expected to live. Again, when you have a look at this, the medical services play a role here as well. The better and the more the type of medical services that you have in the country, of course, you can live longer there. So again, your developed countries will have a higher life expectancy than your developing countries. Okay, now if you have a look at these indicators, now all that I'm going to do now is that I'm going to have a look at these indicators, and we are going to apply them to this map that we've got here. Now, if you have a look at this map, it deals with the difference in development on a global scale. Very important map. Now, this is not only a map, it's more infographic, because we give you lots of other sources here, and lots of other information is given here on this map. So, if we look at this one, firstly, the thing that you have to look at is this line that's drawn here. This line is called the brunt line. Now, what is the brunt line? The brunt line, it actually divides the world into a richer north and a poorer south. And you'll see that that line is not a straight line like the equator. Just have a look at this. You'll see mostly of the Americas are included. You'll see that most of the European, some Asian nations are included. And then suddenly it turns down and comes back here. Then only 2 countries in the southern hemisphere are really included in the rich north, which will be Australia and New Zealand. And the rest, you will see, these will be qualified as the poorer south. Now, let's have a look at the characteristics of your rich northern country. Just have a look at this. Remember, we've done most of these concepts now in the previous slide. Now we're applying these concepts to a map, to an infographic. Let's have a look. Again, a high GNP, low birth and death rates. Can you see, I've mentioned this. Literacy level is very high. Most people have safe water, access to safe water and sanitation. And if you look at your less economic developing countries, it's exactly the opposite. Again, you only need to study the one because the other one is just the opposite. A lower GNP, high birth rates, literacy level low, limited access to safe water and sanitation. Now, those are your general characteristics of the richer north and the poorer south. Now, let's have a look at statistics and graphs that will actually support this that I've just told you. Let's have a look firstly. Now, if you have a look at this, these are called population pyramids. Now, if you put your mind a little bit back into reverse gear, you will know that this is what you've done in grade 10, your population pyramids. Now, let's have a look at it like this and see if what we've done in the previous slide, if it applies here. Let's have a look at this. Here we've got our age pyramid. And the thing that you notice here is look at the base, look at the narrow base here. And look at this one. Look at the very broad base here. What does that tell you? That tells you that more people are born here in the poorer south than in the northern one. That is what the first thing says. But it tells us another story. Have a look at this, the way in which you move up the pyramid. And look at the total number at the top here. And look at the total number at the top there. Immediately you would see that it's much broader in the northern rich north than the south. Why? Can you remember we were talking about access to medical, the quality of your medical services that are of course much more in the richer north. And that is why people live longer, the life expectancy. You see how all these things are coming together now. Then another thing that I would like to show you. Remember I showed you the primary, secondary and tertiary activities. Now here we've got another way. I will look at this. Tertiary, the green here. Look at the huge amount of tertiary compared to the south. Look, the primary, as I've said, especially in farming activities, lots of them in the south, in the poorer south. And look at the small amount of primary activities in the northern, rich northern part of the world. There's one thing that I've still got to refer you to, and these are these pie charts here. This has to be with the population where they live in rural versus urban areas. So let's have a look at this. In the northern, richer north, see that orange, look at the large orange there and the smaller orange here. So more people in the northern, please don't make the mistake and talk about the northern hemisphere. Okay, most of these things are in the northern hemisphere. But remember there are also southern hemisphere countries in this northern part of the brunt line. So okay, so here we've got the large orange and here we've got a small orange. So this means that more people in the northern, the rich north, actually live in urban areas, and in the southern part, south of the brunt line, most of them live in the rural part. Now, grade 11, this is your core of development. If you understand this infographic that I've just shared with you, then you will understand what's really going on in this world with regard to development. see that you understand this, have a look at it. I'm sure that in many of your textbooks or even in your working book that you've at school, you have received a map like that. Don't only look at the map. Don't only look at the things. You must understand the information that is given to you in that map. Because, these maps are very popular also in examination where certain things are examined. See that you know your concepts first, because you won't know and understand this map before you know your concept. You must know what's a GNP. You must know what's birth rate. You must know what's death rate, okay? You must know these things before you can really understand what's going on here. Okay, so that concludes our difference in developments on a global scale. Let's have a look at frameworks for development. And what we're going to look at frameworks development is only one thing. I'm just going to quickly mention this to you, just very shortly, to have a look at the factors that influence development. If you have a look at history, it's a fact that especially in the time of the colonialists, that lots of the resources in the developing world was removed by these people, right? And so the history immediately placed the developing nations far a few years back on the scale of development. Then the second one has to do with trade imbalances. Now we're going to have a look at trade later on. I'm just going to mention this to you. When you have a look at trade, you look at import and you look at exports. Now, if you import something, remember those things must be paid. If you export something, then you get paid for it. All right? So if you have a country that must buy more stuff, in other words, import more stuff, of course it's going to influde their level of development, because they don't get the same amount of money when they export things. Okay, I'll get back to that again. Then, of course, your population growth. If you have a look at something like family planning, for instance, of course, in your developed world, your population is more stabilized than in the developing world. Then education and training, right? We've shown you that also on the previous one, the map. Of course, you've got more universities, you've got more training facilities in your developed world. Then natural resource limitations. Of course, some people just don't have the things which they can use to, export stuff. Environmental degradation. When you get that, when your environmental is, let's say, use the word that you can understand, it's turning ugly. It's not as aesthetic, as beautiful anymore. And that happens when people, for instance, just go and cut off all the trees and have to bear with the consequences of that. And then, of course, the access to resources. Remember, I've said the access to resources. I didn't say resources alone. Because you see, if there are resources in the developed world, the rich countries, they can go and get it. But as soon as you've got a country with resources, and it's a developing world, and it's a poor country, they've got a problem. They cannot get it. Take something like oil, all right? If a poor country has oil, it can't use it, all right? And what's going to happen then is that the rich countries are going to come in, and they're going to say they're going to help you and all these things, but at the end of the day, you're really not going to make the profits that you can and develop your country further. Then, of course, your energy is also a factor that influences development. And, of course, in the developed nations, you've got energy, it's just there and it can be used. Okay, so that was our factors influencing development. I've mentioned here something about trade imbalances. I've mentioned that now. Now we're going to have a look at the role of trade in development. What role does it play? And how is it done? Let's have a look at this. And this is very important. The first thing that you must know is, but what is trade? What is international trade? Right. Trade is the exchange of goods and services between countries. The exchange of goods and services in countries. For instance, my country, we've got a lot of iron ore, you haven't got, so what we do, I'll give you that, you pay me with something else, or even in money or whatever. That has to do with trade, of the exchange of goods and services between countries. Now, this exchange happens by means of two things, by imports and by exports. The first one, the imports, these are goods that are brought into a country. Okay? So your imports are goods brought into a country. But your exports, on the other hand, your exports are goods that are shipped out of a country. Right? Now, if you look at this immediately, you must think, it's not only definition here. I must think a bit further. I must think with regard to, if I can sell things in my country, I can get an income and I can develop my country. If I've got enough for myself and there's even an excess more left, then I can do that. But what's the problem if I'm not in possession of that? Then it means I've got to import it, and that is going to hugely impact on my level of development, because the money that I could have made from exports, I've got to pay the imports for. Now I can't develop something like, say, infrastructure in my country. We haven't got the money to do so. Now I must go somewhere, borrow the money for it. You see, so exports and imports is not only important when it comes to that you must know the definitions of each of them. You must also know the impact of it. And that is why we are going to look at the very important thing called balance of trade. Now, what is balance of trade? Here we see we've got our exports, we've got our imports. Balance of trade is the difference in value between a country's imports and exports. Right? So it's actually what's happened is the exports minus the imports. And it's very important that you've got to have a look at it, because the relationship between that is going to hugely impact on our country. Let's have a look and see what happens. So what we've got now, grade 11, is that we have a negative and a positive balance of trade. Now, what's the difference between a positive and a negative balance of trade? Now, I've got two scales here. So let's have a look at this. If you look at this one here, you'll see that the imports weigh more and the exports are left, right? So when your inputs are more, then you've got a negative trade. Now, why is it called a negative trade if you've got to import more? Because if you've got to import more, say you just use a small number, if you import something of 5 million rand, right? Then you've got to pay that 5. And if you export it only for 3 million rand, then it means that you've got a profit loss of 2 million. But if you could import something of 5 million, and you could export something else of 8 million, what's going to happen then? Then you've got this. Then you've got this, what is called a positive balance of trade. Now here you can see that the value of the export, can you see that weighs more? So it's a better for your country to be in this position than for a country to be in this position. Because as long as you are in this position where your exports can carry the burden of your development in the country, then you can develop. But if you have a look at the negative trade balance, how and where are you going to get the financial resources to develop your country by means of, say, a simple thing as I mentioned before, like infrastructure? These things cost money. And the only way that you can get that is by means of trade or whatever. Otherwise, you've got to go and borrow the money. And that is why we're coming to the next thing. This leads to something called trading relationships. And we come along, let's have a look at these three. The first one is free trade. Now, what is free trade? Free trade is the movement of goods capital and labor without regulations, without control, without barriers. Right? We've got two countries here, I can move that way, you accept this from me, I accept that. In other words, it's a free trade between the countries. Now, the other thing that we can get is something called trade barriers. Now, this is when the politicians come in here. It's regulations or policies that restrict international trade. When you've got to pay tariffs, quotas, and subsidies. So immediately if you have a look at this, your trade barriers, when it comes to your developing country, these people have a problem. And then if you have a look at fair trade. Fair trade between the less economic developed countries and the more economic developed countries, in which fair prices are paid to the producers. You know what's happening? One of the saddest stories in the world has to do with coffee beans, actually. You know, where the farmer produces his coffee beans, but he's so in need of the money that your richer nations can tell him, listen here, I'll give you that for the... Say it's worth, say 10 million. The country's, the whole country's exports on coffee beans. But the farmer who really has, he's going to be the negative, because a richer country can come and say, okay man, I'm not going to pay 10 million for that, I'll give you 8 million. Now the problem is that the profit of the guy right at the bottom of the scale is cut off. And he's earning less and less and less now. And now what fair trade deals with is, fair trade says, listen here, if this thing costs 10 million rand, you pay 10 million. Then it's fair. And that is why, if you have a look at the definition for it again, trade between the developed and the developing nations, in which fair prices are paid to the producers. So you can see that when it comes to development geography, grade 11s, there are so many factors that impact on this. And as in life, as you know, the guy with the money, he calls the shots. And this is exactly what's happening here in the world when you get these trading relations. Why do you think are there so many meetings, conferences held with the G8 or top trading nations or whatever, right? That's to protect themselves and to exclude countries like us who really need the trade. And that's very, very important that we have a look at this as well, and that you understand it. Now, when you have a look at this stuff, trading and all this grade 11, then there's one thing that played a huge impact on this, hugely impacted on this, and that is something called globalisation. So let's have a look at globalisation and its effect on development. And I'm sure that what I'm going to mention now will make sense to you, because you people have grown up in a globalized world. You know, when I was your age, or your teachers were your age, your parents were your age, the world wasn't as globalized as it is today. So let's have a look at this. Firstly, what is globalization? That is the process that links places throughout the world, making boundaries of little importance. The movement of goods, ideas, and people all over national borders. Now, as I've said, this has been made possible by means of your infrastructure, by means of your by means of the things that are there to transport goods that weren't there a few years ago. I remember, for instance, in the 60s, people, if you want to play sport overseas, you couldn't go by plane. You know, my father played sport overseas, and he had to go by boat. Took him 15 days to get there. Now, it's a matter of 11 hours to get to any destination to play your sport, because the globalized world makes this so much easier. I would like to see a Springbok team getting on a boat to play a match against the All Blacks or whatever. Now, I mean, that's going to take them a few days to get there, which was done with the old Springbok teams and the old All Blacks teams that visited South Africa in the 50s, 60s. They came by boat. But now, because of all the globalization process, have a look at all these things that we've got available today. And the world is actually becoming smaller and smaller and smaller all the time. Yeah, we said a few months ago, we see the private companies actually entering a space race, the billionaires. And that space travel is within the next 40, 50 years is going to be as normal as as air travel is at this very moment. Okay, so that has to do with globalization. Now, if you have a look at the other thing that you actually can't, that you must join up with globalization is your multinational corporations. Now, what are multinational corporations? They are very, very large companies which have offices and factories all over the world. Now, you know this. Yeah, we've got a company like Samsung, for instance. Now, you know, when I grew up, I can't remember that a company like Samsung even existed. I didn't know about it, if they existed. But now you will know about that because of the globalized world, because of TV, because it's so easy for things to reach you. Look at things like your Hewlett Packard, for instance, right? Like Coca-Cola, BMW. These are all huge companies. I mean, if you look at a simple thing like your sports companies, your Adidas, your Nikes, they've got offices all over the world. They've got factories all over the world. And here's the problem when it comes to those things. I would like you to pick up a Nike shoe or Nike garment and just go to the label here where it has been made. That would be an interesting thing, right? And then you will see that the garment has not, or the shoe has not been made in the USA. Although it's an American firm, why not? Because the labor in the USA is too expensive. So what they do is they take that and they go put the factory in another country, a poorer company, and people must make that, and they don't earn a third, what I'm talking about, less than a third of the salary that they would have paid it for in America. I can remember, for instance, that there was a time that Brazil made Volkswagen cars, and Volkswagen used the Brazil plant because the labor was cheaper there, and they could make more profits on their cars. So this is a whole thing, and you know, there's an interesting name that they use for the word they use. They call it a sweatshop, where people must work that the sweat goes up, but they get the minimum payment for it. You know, if you look at, to come back to sports garments, that somebody making a shoe for one of these multinational companies, that person, I'm sure, will need at least 5-6 salaries to be able to buy that shoe, if not more of those salaries. So please, people, have a think of this. Development is not fair. Think of, when you see the news, ask yourself certain questions. But what is really happening? What is really going on? And what are those people, what are their role playing in those big multinational corporations? Okay, so that was what is globalization, the impact on the world and the multinational companies. Now the problem is, what is the impact of globalization on development? Now, this is very important, because if you look at globalization and you look at development, then you're going to see that the two-way traffic is not that fair. You see, because when you look at the lower economic development countries, then mostly, globalization is going to have a negative impact on them. Where globalization is more a rich man's world, which you will see now. Let's have a look at this. When you have a look at the impact of globalization, the first thing is that the richer become richer. The richer countries become more richer and more wealthier all the time. And then, of course, The less developed countries, economic developed countries, they will get poorer. But look at this. Even your more economic development countries benefit from cheap labor that they can find in your poorer countries. Okay, now you're going to tell me, hey, at least they are jobs. People, that's the most unfair job that you can get because people are not paid properly. And that is why it's called sweatshops. And that is why the more expensive, the larger corporations will use those countries. This means that if they can pay less, for people who work in the factories, the margin of profit will stretch all the time. A problem that we've got then is a brain drain from the less economic development countries. People who are highly educated and they have received their education in, say, South Africa or any one of the African countries, and then he sees, but you know what, I can earn 4 or 5 times more in another country. I'm going to immigrate to that country. That means that the developing world are not only getting economical poorer and poorer all the time, but when it comes to the brain, these people are also leaving. Then the trade imbalances, I've mentioned that. Remember that it's always your less economic development countries who will have your negative balances of trade. Mostly they will have that. Then of course, because of this globalization, you will have price increases all the time. Now, I don't understand. I really don't understand price increases. Because what happens is that you are paying more for things just the following year. I know a little bit about tennis. And I know that you look at the tennis racket that they've got this year, and all they'll do is they'll give you the new paint job, spray job, put it on the market, and the price goes up by 250 Rand for the following one. It's exactly the same thing. So what we've got here is that inflation and price increases is really killing your less developed countries. And then this one, and here, our own country, South Africa, must take a lot of blame for this. Because as long as this happens, we will not develop. Let's have a look at this. When you have that your less economic development countries export raw materials to your richer countries. Do you know what's happening here in South Africa? We export iron ore to other countries. And you know what? We must buy iron back to us. Now, that's an absolute no-no. What should have happened is that we should have taken that iron ore, right? We should have put it in industries or whatever, making iron, making steel, and then export the steel or the iron that we have made. You see, then 2 things are going to happen. The first thing is we create lots of job opportunities in our country. Now, we lose the job opportunities. But the second thing that happens is we will earn more money by exporting iron ore. You are exporting millions of our rands, and we're getting nothing in return. About 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were companies called Iscor here in South Africa. We had our own iron steel companies here in South Africa. I don't think they exist anymore. Well, the result is that we are dependent on other countries to actually, take our raw materials and develop it into steel, and then we must pay 3, 4, 5 times more the price. So that's the impact of globalization, only on a simple thing like iron ore for South Africa. Then the dependency on the less economic developed countries on the MEDs. The poorer countries are so dependent on the rich countries. And if it wasn't for globalization, it wouldn't have been that the case. And as I've mentioned, that globalization is mostly a rich man's game that we're talking about here. And some way we must try to get these things back to our decent countries here. And of course, this leads to the next one, the last one, poverty. Poverty in our country, in many of our neighbors in the African countries. Do you know that the biggest problem facing the world today is poverty? Don't know how we're going to get rid of that. But that's the biggest problem. And globalization was one of the key factors when it came to this, because it made our developing countries, our poorer countries, have become poorer and poorer and poorer, and that has gone through to the ordinary citizen, to the ordinary man in the street. Okay, so this is the impact of globalization on development. I want to have a look at the effect of development on the environment. Now, we had now looked at development globally and how it affected your richer countries and how it affected your poorer countries. Now we're going to see, but you know, there's one thing of a developing country. When you develop, the first thing that flies out of the window is the environment. If you look at what's happening now, where people, the Kyoto Protocol, for instance, where they wanted to get rid of your gases, your greenhouse gases, some countries are just not interested in that. Because you see, if they do that, then it means that they will have to produce sometimes less. So let's have a look at the effect on development on environment. Firstly, air pollution. Now, especially from coal-burning power stations. Now, I'm going to have a look at coal-burning power stations later on, especially in South Africa. So just keep that one, park that one in your minds along. The second one, water pollution. You know, if you look at water pollution, it's tragic, really tragic. When you see the amount of plastic that reaches the oceans, that has been dumped by us, by human beings. When they catch a fish and they cut it open and you see the plastic that they find in the fish. So when it comes to development, there's one thing that we must remember. Pollution and development goes hand in hand. And at the moment, we are not making a good enough attempt to combat that. The last one of the pollutions would be your land pollution. And this is caused by dumping, bulbous rubble, poor agricultural practices, industries and mining. Now, all these things coming from there must be dumped somewhere. And if you want to see how developed a nation is, somebody says, if you want to know how developed a nation is, go look at this dumping site. And as I've said, somewhere along the line, we will have to see what we can do something about that also. And then what's happening now is that nature makes space for people's homes, industries, infrastructure, mining, farmlands, and so forth. You must know that initially we had lots of woodlands, greenery. But then we came. And what happened then is we needed industry. We needed buildings. We needed shelter. And these things had to be removed, that nature is making place for that. Now, I'm not saying that we mustn't build this stuff. But I'm saying that when you have a look at these things, that sometimes we really don't do decent impact studies of that area. To see, but what will that area be within the next 20, 30 years? The thing that I've done here. Okay. Then what's also happening, and this was an interesting one that I've seen here, is that that we will have a lot of material goods, a lot of stuff. We own a lot of stuff, but the quality of life decreases. Now that's not that's not worthwhile. That you go and you've bought yourself a lot of things. And the pollution is starting to kill you, right? And you're getting ill because of things in the world. I'm not saying that you mustn't get those stuff. I'm saying look at the world and try to make it a better world, a more healthy world for us living. Then, of course, deforestation. When people cut down trees, as you can see that, and you know by now, you know that the forests are the lungs of the world. And the more forest trees you cut down, the less oxygen is going to be available. So we've got to have a look at all these things. Now all these things, if you have a look at this, then you will see that development it's something that we perhaps must do. We must develop. But the impact, the effect of development is hugely because of the irresponsible behavior of us as units. And I've read somewhere, people are looking for other planets that we perhaps can go and live on. We couldn't look after this one. Just leaving you with that message. And the people who are in the developed world, again, I've seen now, luckily, in the last one, that they are really going to try China, the USA especially, with Russia, to do something, to really cut off the gases, make it much little, to bring it down, that we can have a much better world to live in. You yourself can do that by looking at your own carbon footprint. All right? The carbon footprint doesn't only come from the nations. It doesn't only come from the politicians. It also comes from you. And you must ask yourself the question, did I play a role in air pollution today? Did I pollute the water today? Did I pollute the land today? And if you have a look at this, you're one of 5-6 billion people. If you have done that something wrong with regard to that, imagine what can happen if everybody does that. So you've got your own role to play in creating a new environment that we can develop. We will never develop in this country if our environment is not looked after in the way it should. Okay, this leads to us the next one, development aid. Now, we had the development, we've seen the richer countries, we've seen the poorer countries, we've seen the exports and the imports, and the poorer countries can't really make up. And then the richer countries come say, okay, I'll give you a few billion rand, few $1 billion, you do this and this, and they call that development aid. Okay, it's a good thing that they could look at that, and that money is provided. There are only two problems. The first thing, remember, most of them are loans and must be paid back, and there's interest on that. That's the first thing. And the second thing was a more interesting approach that I've read in a book a few years ago. And it has to do with the fact that we want trade, not aid. And that's the interesting part that I read in that book, was that if we in Africa can trade 2 to 3% more than we are currently trading, then we can get in more money than development aid will ever give us. So we must look more than responsible trading relationships, that we can up our trade, and that people mustn't come and say, but you can only trade with this and this and this and this, and protecting their slice of the cake all the time. So this is the role of development aid that we're going to have a look at now. Now, firstly, what is development aid? Development aid is given by governments and other agencies to support the economic, environmental, social, and political development of developing countries. Right. Now, there are three types of aid that can be there. It can firstly be your bilateral aid that you can receive from your developed countries. That would be things like grants, loans, technical assistance. That's called bilateral aid. Multilateral aid, assistance given by large organizations such as the United Nations and World Bank. That's called multilateral aid. And then we've got conditional aid that has performance conditions attached to it, where people will say, okay, we're giving you this, say, so many billion dollars, rand we're giving to you, and when you've reached this, then you get this again. And you get that, so its performance conditions are attached to it. That will be called the conditional aid. But now, if you receive aid, as I've mentioned before, I hope you see what I've tried to do today. I've showed you how the one actually joins up with the other one, right? How the trade goes into development, how the developing goes into your aid now. And the question is, what is the impact of aid on development? Now you've seen the type of aids that we can have. The first one, the question, when is aid effective in your less economic developing countries? Now, this is effective when it's this. This must be effective, sorry. It contributes to the training of personnel and builds economic, technical expertise. All right? Secondly, when it provides humanitarian relief, it encourages industrial development. It supports better economic and social policies. It provides resources for investment and finance projects. It supports countries to develop their natural resources and power supply. It provides development of clean water sanitation. This will be the effect of the green part of the impact. Remember, I have a typing error here that should read effective. Okay. So when you have a look at this, you'll immediately see that if aid is given in this way, then it really develops the country. But now, the problem is that aid can be ineffective also. And there are so much strings attached to it. So, let's have a look at this. Firstly, poor countries may struggle to repay the loans. Secondly, the aid doesn't reach the people who need it most. In other words, the poorest people. Then, of course, corruption. Politicians use aids for the aid money for their own. Now, what can be done is, if it may be a condition of investment, that the project is run by foreign countries. And some of the resources or profits go back to the donor country. Let me give you an example of this. When foreign countries come in and they say, okay, we've given you aid, we will develop. That's the worst type of aid that you can get. Because they're giving the money, but they're not. There's no job creation. Because they are going to do. And the other one has to do with, we'll give you the aids, but profits come back to us. For instance, you want 50, you need 500 tractors. And they said, okay, you need the money for 500 tractors. There's the so many million that you need for 500 tractors. But we'll give it to you if you buy the tractors from us. Now that, people, is the most unfair type of aid that you can do, because they didn't help you. They gave you the money and they took the money back again because you had to buy things from them with their own money. So that is an absolute no-no when it comes to international aid. And sometimes the aid is tied to purchase goods from the donor country. I've just mentioned that as well. All right? You've got the money, you need that, you buy it from us. They haven't given you a thing. In fact, they've given you money, you must pay back it in, the interest on it, and you must buy things from them. In other words, you're just giving the money back to them with interest and by means of the things that you've bought from them. Okay, so grade 11, that completes our third quarter's work. We're going over to the fourth quarter work. That won't be so long. It's much less work that we do in the last quarter. So let's just have a look at this. Now, when it comes to your fourth quarter, your last quarter's terms work, that has to do with resources and sustainability. Resources and sustainability. Now, let's have a look at your resources and sustainability. The first thing that we are going to have a look at is soil erosion. Soil is a very important resource, especially in South Africa also. We've got such a lot of farming activities. So let's have a look at soil erosion. Now, if you have a look at soil erosion, there are three things that you must consider. First, you must know what is soil erosion. You must know the causes of soil erosion. And you must know the effects of soil erosion. And of course, how to combat it. Come to that later. But let's first have a look at what is soil erosion. Right, soil erosion occurs when the top layer of soil is removed from the land by water, wind, or ice. Plants are then not able to grow because the nutrients have been lost. And that's very, very important. The topsoil has been removed. That means that the nutrients are lost in that. Okay, now let's have a look at the causes of soil erosion. The causes of soil erosion. And that's very important. Now there are basically three causes. Firstly, we as humans. And I'm just mentioning two or three examples of each. There are much more, of course. Think of things like deforestation, mining, where we actually cause the soil erosion. Physical, wind. You know, when the wind blows, you see the sand going there. Water also transports the soil. And ice. Those are the three physical things that causes soil erosion. And then animals. If you've got too many animals of your farm, they're going to trample your farm. Right? Overgrazing, they're going to trample footpaths. And once the top layer of vegetation has been removed, the water comes, the wind comes, you blow that away, you wash it away. But if you have a look at this, you'll see that actually the animals can be actually connected to humans as well. Because if there are too many animals on a farm, so of course the farm is full. If there's overgrazing, it has allowed it to happen. Right? So perhaps there is a connection between the humans and the animals. So let us have a look at the effects of soil erosion. Firstly, the fertile topsoil is removed. We've mentioned that here in the definition already. More pressure on soil. Fewer food can grow, less food to eat. Dams will fill up, and if with your soil, and if dams start to fill up, it means the carrying capacity of water that is reduced. Very important. The sand is deposited on the continental shelf in the sea as well. Ecosystems in the rivers are destroyed, and your drinking water is polluted. Now, grade 11, I first did this with you, because now I want to refer you back to what I've started off with. Remember what we started off? The questions geographers ask. And when you study your erosion, have a look at this. First question, what is it? What is soil erosion? Right? What happened? There's the causes. Right? What was the impact? Can you see these three questions are already there? Okay? But then there's one very important question as well. How can it be managed? That's the last question. And here we are with the soil erosion management issue. Now, what can we do? Firstly, contour plowing. Now, what is contour plowing? If you've got a slope and you plow up and down the slope, what's going to happen? Right? It's going to happen when it rains, then the water is going to run down the slope. But if you have a slope and you plow in this direction, with the contours, then the water can't run down the slope. So contour plowing is the first thing. Secondly, crop rotation. You must plant different crops to preserve the nutrients. For instance, if you plant a certain crop, say tomatoes, for instance, just making an example, right? Then tomatoes need a certain type of nutrients that it extracts from the soil. And if you every year you plant, then the same nutrients also always going to be extracted, and later on that whole it's going to be a barren piece of land that you've got. But if you planted tomatoes for 1 or 2 years, and you plant anything different the following year for another 2 years, and then you see you're rotating your crops. In other words, the type of nutrition that needed for tomatoes can be replaced within that next rotational year. So it's very important, crop rotation. Then something that I've surely seen when I was on my way to Stellenbosch now, where we are broadcasting from, then you see the farms and you see lots of these trees on the border of the farms, and they are there not only for aesthetic value, to look beautiful and all these things. They are there as windbreaks. In other words, if the wind blows from a certain direction, it's going to hit the trees, and the trees are going to absorb most of the wind speed, and therefore erosion can't take place. Right. The other thing that you can do to manage soil erosion is to reduce your livestock. Now, I've managed this in the previous one also. If you reduce your animals, then it means it prevents overgrazing. Then to build retaining walls, we'll see that the soil doesn't get blown away. And then plant trees, plant vegetation to protect soil. You see, if you've got an open piece of land, imagine this open piece of land, there's nothing on top of it. If it rains, what is going to happen? If the wind blows, what is going to happen? It's going to blow those seeds. Right? The sand. But if you could have your open piece of land and you could cover it with lawn, if you could plant a few shrubs, trees on them, then it means that the soil won't be lost. Okay, so that is that we dealt with now, soil erosion. Grade 11, please remember that don't only look at what the content that I've done with you now, even in this whole session so far. I've referred you, I've also said in the beginning, we're going to show you how to study these things, which we are going to do now, and that you must study in a certain direction. I've mentioned to you again the questions that geographers ask. Now, we're going to look at a question now that is based on a certain type of data. All right? Now, remember, we've shown you the type of data that we had, and we are going to look at a map of a farm or a diagram. Maps and diagrams are nearly the same way that you really deal with them. And we're going to see what must you do to when you've been confronted with it. Now, if what we're going to do now is how to deal with a map and a diagram. Now, grade 11, the most important thing that I'm going to tell you now is please listen to this. You know what happens is that I don't know how many times you're going to get at least 7, 8 diagrams in each of your question papers. All right? And if you have a look at your diagram, you know what do most of the learners do? They go and they read the question and they look for the answer in the diagram. Then they read the question again and then they look at the diagram. Oh, wait, okay. That's completely the opposite of how things should be done. The first thing that you should do is to cover the questions and take 5 minutes and read every diagram, 3 to 5 minutes. Now you say, but I'm losing a lot of time, 3 to 5 minutes every diagram. I mean, that's 20, 30 minutes I'm going to lose in the exams. No, you're not. You are actually going to win more time. Because what's going to happen now is that you don't need to go and look for something again. Because you've got a mental image of the map, of the diagram, and you will be able to answer some of those questions without going back to the diagram. So let's have a look. How do you get the mental image of a diagram? And that's very important. Firstly, you read the title. All right? Secondly, you read the text. Then you read all the labels, everything that's written. You see, the first 3 things has to do with read that you do of this. Then look at the key. Identify the information needed. And that's actually the key thing when it comes to map work, when it comes to diagrams, is that if they ask a question, there's lots of information there on the map. But if you have read it and you read the question, then you say, okay, that's in the map, I need that, I will need that, and I will need that in the diagram to answer this question. But you can't do it if you start off with your questions and every time you read the question and go back to your diagram. There's no ways that it's going to work. Okay, so so when you read it, the key questions is what is it, where is it, and why is it there? Those are the questions. Now let's have a look at a question. Here we've got a question with regard to soil erosion. Now, what most of you will do is you will look at the question and then you will look at the diagram and then try to get to the answer then. But what we should do, I said now, and we're going to read this diagram now. Remember the steps that I showed you now. The first thing, you look at the title and you say, soil erosion. Right, now immediately I know this is the topic that's being examined. Then let's have a look. Now let's read everything on here and I must look at the key. Right? Okay, here's A, here's B. What's that all about? Okay, Let's have a look at the key. The first one says found boundaries. Okay, so that's the farm boundary. So you have 2 farms. That's the first thing that you can see. You see, grade 11, if you didn't do that, you wouldn't even know that there are 2 farms. Okay, so there you've got your 2 farm boundaries. Then you see trees. Okay, on the one farm, here's trees, but not on the other one. All right? Then you see here's 50 cattle. Every dot represents 50 cattle. See, but okay, yeah, these cattle, yeah, whoa, here's much more. And they all are together here. All right? Then you see water point. These diamonds are water point. Here's only one on this farm. All right? Oh, but look at this one. Yeah, more than one water point. So this means even this farm, if the animals need water, all of them go to the one big water point. But this guy is decentralized his water points. In other words, now they can few cattle, and now you don't have a trampling of your soil. They all don't move in one direction. Right, so we've seen the border. Then we see field border. What's this? Okay, we've got a lot of camps here, and we see that this farmer has a lot of borders on his field. Now, what does this mean? This means that all these animals are in different camps that we've got here. Okay, so that's very important, because this guy nearly doesn't have any camps. Now, what will that? What could that mean? It only could mean that while these animals are grazing and we've got open spaces here, this guy will then put all the animals there. They will graze there, and these camps will have an opportunity to grow the grass back again. You see how we are reading that. Coming back to that again. The last one, wind direction. Oh, now if they say wind direction, then this means the wind is blowing in this direction. And then you must know, but hang on, here I've read in the key, I've seen here that here's a row of trees. So this means if the wind blows in, this is the general wind direction, of course. If it blows here, then this guy is not going to be protected. His farm is not going to be protected. But there we've got the trees, and immediately we've got a windbreak here. Let's go further. Now let's see what's written on the diagram. Here we see here it be ground uncovered for 3 months. What must cross your mind now? Erosion can occur here because there's nothing on the ground to prevent the soil from blowing away. Let's have a look at this. Field left open, that we have done with you already. Open piece of ground covered with grass. And immediately you see there's a huge difference between this guy, he's going to use this later on, but he covered it with grass, he covered it with vegetation so long that his soil can't be blown away. Now, if you have a look at this has taken me now about 3-4 minutes to go through this. And I've asked the critical questions. That is exactly what you must do in the exams. And not dive into your question, read your question, go, people, I promise you by the 3rd question, you'll be so mixed up because you didn't have a general mental image of what's really going on in the diagram. You can't deal with geography questions like that. You cannot. You must know your image. You must know what's going on in your data. Okay, now let's have a look at the question. The first question, define soil erosion. What is it? Right? See, we've got the what is it question. Second one, what type of soil erosion is shown in the diagram? And immediately you say, but hang on, the diagram, there was wind, right? And this other guy had, can only be wind erosion. You don't even know, you don't even need to go back to the diagram because you have read the diagram, right? Then they say, discuss 3 causes of erosion. Now, this is very important. And remember, when you have your data, when you have, whether it's now a map, whether it's an extract, whether it's an article, some of the questions, especially your higher order questions, you won't find the answer in the data. That you need to get back to your content. And this is an example of such a question. Okay, now look at this one. At which farm, A or B, did the farmer not take precautionary measures to reduce soil erosion? If you read this thing, you didn't even need to go back to the diagram. Am I right? Because you know, I've read this. I know the one guy, perhaps you can't remember whether it's A or B, and that's the only reason you need to go back to the diagram and say, okay, it can only be B. Okay? Then explain what the other farmer has done to manage the consequences of soil erosion. Let me see what has this guy done everything. First, you see, he's got his rows of trees. He covered the open piece with grass. He's got a lot of camp boundaries here. He's left field open for grass to grow. And look at his lot of water points. In other words, the cattle don't only walk in one direction, but look at the total number of cattle. And you see he reduced it, and that's why soil erosion cannot take place. Or very little bit. You always can't do 100% of that. Grade 11, do you see what I'm trying to tell you? Please take your time. Please have a look at your diagram before you start with your questions. Okay, right. I want to move on to conventional energy resources. We're going to energy now. Now have a look at this. You must know that you have two, your conventional and your non-conventional energy resources. Let's have a look at this. What's the definition of the three conventional sources of energy used to generate electricity are fossil fuels, water, and nuclear power. Now they can give you such a diagram and say, right, you must identify them and say, that's easy, man. There's nuclear, there's hydro, there's fuels, there's coal, and there's oil. So now we know what conventional sources of energy is. Now what's very important is we're going to have a look at electricity now. Remember, we're busy with resources now, all right? And we're busy with coal especially, and we're going to see, just very quickly, how do we really, how is electricity really being produced? Now there are basically six steps. Now please, grade 11, this is not a high order explanation. Just that you must know that this is the processes, very quickly and shortly and simply explain how electricity is generated in a power station. Firstly, the coal is mined, right? Secondly, then it's pulverized or made fine, looks powderish, and then it's blown here into a boiler. There you see the boiler there, right? And then third thing that happens, it is burned, and then it turns the water here into steam. And what happens then is that the steam turns blades of a fan here, that is called a turbine. And then electricity, then it goes to the generator, coil you find there, and electricity is produced there, and then it is sent to homes and factories. Now, as I've said, grade 11, this is a very, very simple way of explaining how very quickly electricity is generated from your conventional power sources. But now, the main thing is, look at another question geographers ask, the impact of conventional energy resources. If you can't remember all the others, just remember coal, because that is the most important conventional energy source in South Africa. In fact, sometimes when I think it's the only one, because nearly 90% of our electricity is being generated from coal, thermal power stations. Okay, so now let's have a look at the impact of conventional energy resources. Firstly, remember that the coal must be mined, right? And what happens at the coal mine is the following. This is the impact thereof. It scars the landscape. You're going to get lots of mine dumps that are really not beautiful. The ecosystem is disrupted because once you start, digging there, it's going to have an impact on the dust from the mining reaches the atmosphere, and of course noise pollution. That would be, remember, coal is your basic source of your conventional energy. But now that coal must go to the power station. Let's see what happens there and what is the impact there. Now, as I've mentioned, those are called thermal power stations. Now, firstly, look at this thing. It's very unsightly, right? And it takes up large areas. It uses a large amount of water. And remember all this? Look at the greenhouse gases that it produces. And it produces harmful acid rain. Sorry. So if you look at your conventional energy sources, this is the impact of. And it starts the place where it's been taken out, the mining process. And it ends even worse when electricity is being generated. So these are our conventional ones. We're coming a little bit later to the non-conventional ones. But let's have a look at how these things will impact on your map work as well. Remember that I said that your map work from this year onwards for you guys will be integrated in the question paper. There's no map work question paper anymore, right? It's integrated as question 3 in your question paper. In fact, we are busy now in the new approach. We are busy with paper 2's work. So let's have a look at what does it look like. So here we've got our topographic map, and here we've got the photo, the orthophoto of the area. So let's have a look at this. You can see the impact and you can see how to identify it on the map. Now these are important questions that you can be asked. The first thing that you will notice here is that the circle that I've drawn here, that is the power station. See here we've got it, the Kriel power station. It's there. And what's interesting of that, you see 4 circles. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the cooling towers. You know, all these coal-generated power stations must have cool towers. Here we've got them. So you can see them on both the photo and you can see them on the map. How do I know that this is a power station? Look at this. Look at all these power lines running from the power station. So what's happening here is that the electricity is being generated here, and then, there we go, it's been sent to the houses and to wherever it's needed. Okay, but here we've got an interesting thing here. Here we've got an excavation. All right, here we've got this here, the excavation. This means that the coal has been mined here. All right, how is this coal transported to the Kriel station? There we've got a conveyor belt, right? And that conveyor belt is running like that and like that straight to the power station. All right, so you can see this means that all of them, you know, these conveyor belts, huge belts, all they do is they just dump the coal on there, and there it goes to be used in the power station. Okay, here's the slimes dams. All of these things that have been produced here and they're not needed anymore. That's been the waste that's been deposited here. So this that we've seen here now, grade 11, this is an interesting way in showing you. Now what we've also done here is a very important map technique named orientation. You must be able to orientate your photo with your map. What I mean by that is you must know that on the photo is that on the map. That on the photo is that on the map. There's a slimes dam on the photo, there's a slimes dam on the map. All right. So map orientation is very important. In fact, you wouldn't be in a position to answer this question if you didn't know how to orientate the map. Okay. So this is very important. I've shown you now how you can see where I get the conventional energy sources and how to identify them on a map and on a topo photograph. Obviously, this I cut out of a map, so we're only using the area that I would have liked to discuss with you. Now, let's move on now to the non-conventional energy resources. Your non-conventional, this would be your wind, the solar, and the biomass. Right? Now, if you have a look at the definition there, it's an energy source which is less commonly used. Non-conventional energy sources are renewable. Right? In other words, you can use it over and over. Oh, what's coal? Coal is not renewable. Once you've taken your coal and burned it up, it's gone. But energy, say for instance wind, I'm going to look at wind later on. That's a renewable resource. There will always be wind. Okay? Examples are wind energy, solar energy, tidal energy, biomass, and geothermal energy. Now on this one, we've got the wind, we've got the biomass, and the solar. And this, I got actually this infographic of the energy production in South Africa. And this is in 2019. Here you see, nuclear 4.5%, 2.5, 2.2. Look at the coal. I mentioned earlier on that about 90% of all our electricity comes from coal. I'm coming back to this at a later stage again. Now, let us first we have looked at coal as an example of your conventional type of energy, electricity that has been generated from coal. That's your conventional. Now, let's have a look at your non-conventional. And the example that I'm going to use here will be wind energy. Now, what is wind energy? It's the process where wind is used to generate electricity. Now, let's have a look at this. What's very important is that we must look at the advantages of wind energy. Now, that will be, firstly, it's renewable, right? The energy source is clean, there's no pollution, produces no greenhouse gases. And this land in between, there where these towers are, that can be still used for farming. There's less damage to the land, right? And it reduces the demand for things like fossil fuel, renewable sources like fossil fuels. It produces no air, water, and water pollution during operation. But it's got a few disadvantages. Now, if you weigh the two, you will see which one is better in comparison with a thermal, the coal-fired power station. Have a look at this. The disadvantages: wind turbines create noise pollution. Remember, these things spin, right? So they are quite noisy. Wind turbines harm and kill birds, bats, and insects. You know, as these things are spinning and bird flies, it can kill them, right? The aesthetic value of the environment suffers as a result of the large wind, and also wind. I just use solar also there as an example. But have a look at this. See how many things are here. This was a beautiful environment. Although it's clean, although it's renewable, right? There's no gas emissions. The problem that you've got is it's not beautiful, right? The aesthetic value, the beauty of the environment that we sacrifice when wind energy is used. Now we're going to look at another example. Right? We are going to have a look at how to use, now when it comes to especially this part of the syllabus, right? You can be confronted with statistics, you can be confronted with graphs, because it's development. And there's such a lot of graphs and statistics that can be tested. Now, firstly, very general thing, how to use graphs and statistics. Now, when it comes to this, here's written, the questions are based on the graph regarding the contribution of services to the GDP of South Africa in 2008 to 2012. Right? And if we give you the graph, this is actually what the graph looks like. And now you are confronted with this. And you must answer certain questions. Again, grade 11, you cannot just dive into the question and start answering. You must know what's going on here. As I said before, 3-5 minutes, take it to read your whatever your data has been provided to you. So let's just, and before I can remember, you're going to deal with graphs differently than you're dealing with maps or diagram. I just want to show you, remember what we did what you had to look at when we dealt with a map of the farm or the diagram of the farm. See how different is this. When you have a look at this, the first question you ask yourself is, what type of graph is this? Is the pie, is the bar, is a line? Now obviously, this is not a line, it's not a pie. You can obviously see that this will be your bar graph, right? The second thing that you must ask yourself is, what information is shown in the graph? Now, where do I get that? That I get in the title. Now remember, you must have a title, and here's written contribution of services to the GDP of South Africa 2008 to 2012. So you now know that's a contribution, right? And then you must see, but does my graph or the statistics, does it show a tendency? And tendency is such an important thing when it comes to the use of statistics and when it comes to graph. You must know, is it an upward tendency, right? Or if it's a downward tendency? Did it become more? Did it become less? Let's have a look at this one. Of course, here you can see that it was in 2028 and went up right to 2012. So in other words, we had an upward tendency in this one. What else must I look at? I must be able to read the values on the map, on the graph, or even in the statistics. They can say, for instance, ask you in 2009, what was the value, and you must be able to read it of the graph's x-axis that it should be done. Is there can any predictions be made? Right? Do you think that the tendency will carry on, or do you think it will drop? Especially higher order questions will look something like that. And then questions based on content, right? That can be asked. Now let's have a look at the grade 11 one. Now here we've got one where I have showed you the type of conventional energy that South Africa has used in comparison with the rest of the world. Now, if we have a look at this, again, I don't dive into the thing. I must have a look at it. South Africa's coal was 88.8, nuclear 4.5, wind 2.5, hydro 2.2. The rest of the world, the coal was 41%. They also had gas. We haven't got gas there. 21%. Hydro, 16%, much higher than us. Nuclear, 4.5. And then they say, okay, but now I've got to compare the two. Because the question in the question deals with two different things. In the first one, we've got statistics. And the second one, I had a graph, a bar graph. So, if I've got coal here 41%, in South Africa it was 88% that's used to generate electricity. The rest of the world, 41%. So we use more than twice the amount of coal. Gas, we haven't got it here. Hydro, 16%, 2.5. In other words, the rest of the world is far, 2.2, far ahead of us when it comes to the use of hydroelectricity power. Nuclear, 4.5. Oh, that's about the same as the rest of it. Now immediately, can you see what I've done? You've got a mental image of what is this all about. Now it makes the questions much easier. Let's have a look at it. The first question, what resource is used to generate most of South Africa's electricity? If you read the source beforehand, you don't even need to go back to your diagram. You will know it's coal. Does the rest of the world use more or less of this coal than South Africa to generate electricity? Then you'll see, if you've read the source, of course I've seen this. South Africa use more than twice the amount of coal. Just look at the next question. What impact would this have on South Africa? Can you see again the questions that geographers ask? Right? First identify, compare, and then you get to what is the impact. And what is the impact of that? Of course the impact will be, we've got huge problems. We'll have huge amounts of excavations for coal, leaving a scarred landscape. We will have huge power stations needed that emit greenhouse gases. You see, the carbon footprint of South Africa is far too large. This is what this is telling us. But can you see grade 11s, just to close off these remarks, is that when you are preparing yourself for exams, you always prepare yourselves towards the type of questions that you can expect. You prepare yourself, you must know how to deal with every type of data that is given to you. And if you have followed us from the beginning of the year, as I said, this is our third revision that we've got here, and you look at all the rest as well, we attempted to show you how to deal with all these things. How to prepare yourself for the exam, not only content. Remember, grade 11's revision is not only content. Revision also deals with these things that I've discussed with you today. And with that, grade 11's, I thank you for being with us, and I hope that we have at least tried to show you how you can prepare yourself much better for the exams, that of course you must get the mark that you deserve, the maximum. Use this, and I promise you, you will get that mark that you have been dreaming for. Goodbye and take care.